5 minutes each. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to Health Committee. I'm Joy Smith, the chair of the committee, and we're very pleased to have you here today. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082, briefing on the health implications of the supply of radioisotopes. So what we're going to do today is we're going to ask each organization in turn to make a presentation. Each person will have a 5-minute presentation. We have before us today Dr. Jean-Luc Urban, President of the Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine. So welcome, Dr. Urban. We have, I'm sorry, from Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine. Then we have Dr. Anne Doig, from the President of the Canadian Medical Association, Dr. Doig, thank you. And we have from the Ontario Association of Nuclear Medicine, Dr. Christopher O'Brien. Welcome, Dr. O'Brien. And we have from the New Brunswick Cancer Network, Dr. Eswar Kumar. And welcome to you. I welcomed you a little earlier, but I'll welcome you again, Doctor. And from the European Association of Nuclear Medicine, we have Dr. Patrick Bourget, and he is the President-elect of the European Association of Nuclear Medicine. We also have Dr. Alexander McEwen, who will be, he's joined us. Hi. I look up and there you are, Dr. McEwen. Thank you for being here. And he's Special Advisor on Medical Isotopes to the Minister of Health. So indeed, we welcome you here. And as I said, you'll each have a chance. We're going to start with Dr. Anne Doig from the Canadian Medical Association. So you'll have a 5-minute presentation. Following all of your presentations, we'll then go into questions and answers. So Dr. Doig, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you and good afternoon, Madam Chair. It is my pleasure to address the committee as part of its monitoring of the situation related to the supply of medical isotopes. As a family physician, I am not an expert in nuclear medicine, but I do refer patients for diagnostic and treatment services that require the use of medical isotopes. First and foremost, I want to note that the CMA is proud of the efforts and dedication of healthcare providers from across the country who have stepped up to meet patients' needs during this ongoing, stressful and demanding time. Through their concerted efforts and those of the industry and governments, the system appears to be coping. Patients are receiving needed diagnostic and treatment services, either through radiopharmaceutical models or their alternatives. However, there are reports of sporadic adverse events, as has been the case since the beginning of this situation. These include delays of 48 to 72 hours and suboptimal imaging due to the extensive use of thallium-201 rather than technetium-99m, which is in short supply. The CMA and representatives from the nuclear medicine community continue to work with Health Canada to mitigate the impact of the shortage of medical isotopes. Scheduling appropriate care commensurate with the expected supply of isotopes has been aided by the efforts of Lantheus and Covidien, suppliers of generators and radiopharmaceuticals, who regularly share vital production information with the nuclear medicine community. This has improved communications and allowed for the better predictability of supply than had been the case last May and June. Lest you interpret my comments to mean all is well, let me be clear. Much is being done, but the current situation is neither optimal nor sustainable, and there appears to be no long-term plan. Canada's physicians are concerned about the toll the current shortage of isotopes is taking on the healthcare system as a whole. In particular, the resulting increased demand on resources, both human and financial, and especially now in the midst of a pandemic, is not sustainable. Therefore, we have called upon governments to invest in a 5-year action plan that includes an emergency fund to increase the use of positron emission technology and the production of associated radiopharmaceuticals across Canada. At our annual meeting this August, Canada's physicians expressed their concern by passing a series of motions calling for government action. This action included demands that the federal government retain Canada's leadership and ability to produce and export medical isotopes and reconsider its decision to withdraw from their production, appoint an international independent expert panel to assess thoroughly the decision to abandon the Maple 1 and 2 nuclear reactors at Chalk River, and release promptly the conclusions and recommendations of the panel to the public. Our delegates also demanded that the federal government conduct open, meaningful, and ongoing consultations with nuclear medicine physicians and their respective national associations on any and all federal decisions directly affecting the supply of medical isotopes. Concern was expressed that decisions have been and will continue to be made for political and financial expediency without taking into account medical ramifications of those decisions. We appreciated having the opportunity to participate in discussions with the expert review panel on medical isotopes appointed by the Minister of Natural Resources. While it is anticipated the panel will report to the Minister by the end of this month, we do not know when that report will be made public and how long it will take to move recommendations to action. Canadian physicians also urge the federal government to invest immediately in research in basic and clinical science to find viable alternative solutions to the production and use of technetium-99m. The announcement of $6 million for research into alternatives to medical isotopes through a partnership between the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada is a good start. We must emphasize that bench-to-bedside research is critical. There must be a clinical translation of new technology to the provision of care. To conclude, the CMA remains concerned about healthcare providers and the healthcare system's ability to sustain the current shortage. Canada's ability to ensure a long-term, stable and predictable supply of medically necessary isotopes, and our lack of contingency planning for the next shortage. The CMA will continue to work with all involved to ensure Canadians have access to the best possible care and treatment.
Thank you, Dr. Doig. We'll now go to Dr. Jean-Luc Urban, and please make your presentation.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, honourable members of this committee, I'd like to start by thanking you on behalf of the Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine for the opportunity to appear in front of the Health Canada Standing Committee on Health and to report back to the committee on the effects of the isotope shortage on Canadians. As you know, the Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine is the national voice of the nuclear medicine physicians across Canada and the 2 million patients that they serve every year.
December of 2007, the Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine has worked relentlessly with all the stakeholder organizations involved in the field of nuclear medicine. Le réacteur de Chalk River est maintenant en arrêt depuis plus de 7 mois.
Chalk River has been down for over 7 months. The impact on Canadians and the Canadian nuclear medicine community has been very significant. It will also have a lasting effect on patients' health, the practice of medicine in Canada and across the world, the Canadian and international nuclear medicine community, and the Canadian nuclear technology.
The weekly supply of technetium across Canada has varied between 0 and 100%, with an average of 50% to 70% depending on the geographic location and the suppliers. Nuclear medicine professionals, technologists, physicists, radiopharmacists, support personnel, and physicians across Canada have worked tirelessly to accommodate the needs of their patients. By working double shift, reorganizing the examination around the timing of the delivery of the spare technetium available by using different protocol and isotope, and by spending an enormous of time over the phone contacting patient and referring physician to reschedule studies, and also by not providing on-call services. Our community was able to minimize the effect of the shortage of isotope on the Canadian patient. En maintenant cet équilibre très délicat.
Through that very delicate balancing act, and at the expense of a significant increase in operational cost, it must be said, the cancellation of patients' tests has been limited. This extraordinary and unsustainable effort of our community, the unreliability of technetium supply, and the uncertainty of medical isotopes production in Canada has already generated serious and damaging consequences. For instance, the enrollment of students in nuclear medicine, mainly technologists and physicians, is down. Some technologists have been laid off in some parts of Canada, and nuclear scientists and other specialists are now moving south of the border.
The function of cells, tissue, and organ, the isotopes enable the detection and treatment of disease at the molecular level before they become evident anatomically and before patients become symptomatic. And I would hope that you have available the schematic that we have drawn for your attention. The earlier the diagnosis of a disease is made, the better the chance of a cure for the disease. And I would also hope that you were given reference 1 and 2 related to the early diagnosis of cancer and cardiovascular disease. The CANM is extremely concerned by the significant decrease from 10 to 25%, depending on the region, of patient referral for nuclear, cardiac, and oncologic tests. Without early detection, assessment, and treatment, cardiac disease and cancer progress to a point where patient well-being is severely compromised and morbidity is higher regardless of management, not to mention the financial burden on the healthcare system and society, which is becoming enormous. Nombre d'entre nous.
Many of us attended the annual meeting of the European Association of Nuclear Medicine that was held in September in Barcelona. The annual European Association of Nuclear Medicine conference is one of the largest annual gatherings of nuclear medicine professionals in the world. This year, more than 5,000 people attended the conference.
The credibility of Canada and its ability to build up nuclear reactor and produce medical isotope has been totally shattered. Also, our colleagues from Europe simply do not understand why Canadians do not have equal access to technetium and the newer isotope and technology like FDG and positron emission tomography across Canada. Healthcare professionals and patients alike are now really questioning the relevancy of the Canadian Health Act, and particularly its provision of portability and criterion of comprehensiveness. It is difficult and shameful to have to admit to our international colleagues that in 2009, Canada is now delivering healthcare services with 20th century tools. Comme vous le savez probablement, la plupart des pays européens.
As you probably know, many Western European countries have decided to continue to rely on their nuclear reactors technology for another 25 years. France, for instance, and I think Dr. Patrick Bourget will be able to give you further details on this, but France is currently building a reactor to produce medical isotopes in the south of the country, and there's also a reactor to be built in Holland.
$1 to a 50-year-old reactor in Hamilton, and giving away $6 or maybe $12 million to fund projects like the production of technetium with cyclotron in order to mitigate the crisis, 5 to 10 years down the road only, the current shortage of technetium, we have really become the mockery of the international medical and scientific community. L'Association canadienne de médecine nucléaire.
The CANM can only encourage members of this committee to consult the European and American...
Could you please, we want lots of time for...
Yeah, I just want to conclude to reiterate, I thought, I'm sorry, but I thought it was 10 minutes as in the past. I just want to reiterate our offer to collaborate with all the stakeholders to make sure that Canadians get what they deserve in terms of the healthcare system.
Thank you so very much. And now we'll go to Dr. Christopher O'Brien.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Nuclear medicine offers unique insights into disease that is not achievable with either CT or MRI alone. It is through a combination of functional imaging, which nuclear medicine excels at, and in conjunction with anatomic imaging, such as CT and MR, that patients obtain the most benefit. Nuclear medicine also plays a vital role in the detection and treatment of various diseases such as cancer, heart disease, thyroid disorders, and blood clots in the lung, just to name a few. And the patients we serve, actually, even though most of our conversation has been about cancer and heart disease, our patients range from newborns to people over 100 years old. So the impact of a medical isotope shortage is profound, affecting every Canadian that needs a nuclear medicine procedure. In order to accomplish this role, a steady supply of reasonably priced medical isotopes is essential. If medical isotopes become too expensive without having the appropriate operational funds transferred to the various hospitals and clinics, the effect would be the same as not...
Doctor, can I just ask you maybe to slow down a little bit?
I'm sorry.
Because the translators can't keep up to you.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
That's okay. It's very interesting.
So the same would be the effect of not having any medical isotopes at all. And what we're beginning to see, such as rationed access, staff layoffs, and departmental closures would be a potential if the costs become increment. And the effect of this will not be in the urban centres, but the effect of this will be in the smaller community hospitals across Canada that rely on nuclear medicine services. So it will have a patchwork impact, but a definite impact. And if this were to occur, the negative impact on patient care would be profound, as we've heard before here. And not only are we looking at the present, but we have to look to what nuclear medicine will offer in the future. And this is in the role of personalized medicine. And this looks at the ability to tailor treatment and diagnosis based on the characteristics of the disease process. And in order for this to occur, and in order for Canadian patients to access this, we will need a very strong nuclear medicine capacity in Canada, so that which will be supported by research into the development of medical isotopes as well as pharmacological agents to allow us to position our patients in a way that they can garner good access to medical care in a timely fashion. There has been discussion in the past is there going to be a need for medical isotopes? This has been a discussion we've heard both in the lay press and through various committee meetings. In North America, at least, there has been an evaluation that between 2008 and 2012 for nuclear cardiology, we're anticipating about a 46% increase in demand for our nuclear services just to assess the heart. And if we look at general nuclear medicine and positron emission tomography, we're looking at approximately an 11% increase in demand over that same time period. And this is just in North America. And if one takes into account the potential increases that we will see in the Middle East, Africa, China, India, and South America, there will be a worldwide increase in demand for medical isotopes. And if the Canadian infrastructure is not in place to ensure that Canada still plays a role in development, we will be competing with larger markets to ensure that our Canadian population has access to nuclear medicine services. And this is vital. This is not just looking how we will compete in Canada, but how we will compete in the world. And if we're not positioned, we may not do well. And what is the reason for this increase? And if you look at nuclear medicine is a procedure that is exceedingly cost-effective. It's one of the cheaper diagnostic procedures that we have when compared with CT, MR, interventional procedures. And the unique diagnostic capability and the impact that this has on patient care, it's almost as if it's a beautiful thing coming together. We have a good technology that has impact and is cost-effective. And Canada has traditionally been a leader in medical isotope production and distribution, but in light of world trends, I think we still have to continue this, and Canada must be positioning itself to take a leadership role in this growth industry, and this will be a growth industry. Unfortunately, the message Canada has been sending out over the last 6 months is that we may not be actively involved in this. If we look at the cancellation of the Maple reactors, this was an impact that caught us completely off guard. Statements from the Prime Minister's office stating that by 2016, Canada will no longer be in the medical isotope business. And this is sending the message, both nationally, provincially, locally, and internationally, that Canada is well on its way to becoming a bit player on the world stage, rather than the leaders that we have been for the last 50 years. And this is the sad reflection. What is our current status? Well, right now we are entirely dependent on foreign sources of medical isotopes. As mentioned, the various companies have done a good job.
I'm just telling you your time. We are over time now,
Okay.
Dr. O'Brien, if
Fair
you
enough.
don't mind wrapping up.
I think one of the important things we have to look at with the cost increases, we need a one-time cost transfer to hospitals and clinics to address the surcharges that we're facing. We need a nuclear medicine equipment fund to allow modernization of our platforms to use less medical isotopes and to reduce the exposure of our patients to procedures. We need a PET scanning program, and we need to reevaluate the abandonment of the Maple projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O'Brien. We'll now go to Dr. Eswar Kumar from the Cancer Network. Dr. Kumar.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to appear before your committee. I am the co-CEO of the New Brunswick Cancer Network, which is a division of the Department of Health and the Government of New Brunswick. I was also the head of the Cancer Center in St. John, New Brunswick, where I still am an active clinical radiation oncologist. Wearing both hats as a civil servant overseeing the cancer system in New Brunswick and as a practicing clinical oncologist, I have a fairly unique perspective on the impact the radioactive isotope shortage has had. My patients and their families are understandably very anxious when I first meet them. The cancer journey from diagnosis through investigations to treatment is not an easy one. It carries a huge emotional and physical burden. As their oncologist, my task is to help them through that journey and ease their burden as best I can. The news of the shortage of radioactive isotopes causing possible delays in completing staging investigations, formulating treatment plans, and commencing treatment has undoubtedly added to this anxiety and emotional stress. However, at least in the New Brunswick situation, thanks to the dedication and the efforts of the staff in nuclear medicine, who have worked many long hours and weekends, the impact on patients has been kept to a minimum. While there has been inconvenience to patients at times, the staff have done well to manage the shortage and avoid any significant delays in commencing treatment. I know that the uncertainty regarding the supply from week to week adds to the stress in the workplace, but others more involved in managing nuclear medicine departments would be better placed to comment on that. As a clinician, however, I am pleased that my patients have been able to have their investigations and treatment within a reasonably acceptable time frame. However, a situation such as this makes one review one's own clinical practice and forces one to become more selective in requesting these investigations, while at the same time ensuring that treatment is not compromised in any way. So while the situation is not ideal, we have coped so far. From a provincial perspective, the tremendous cooperation and collaboration between the health zones and authorities in the province has been very satisfying. Resources and information have been shared to ensure that patient needs have been met. And again, the dedication of the nuclear medicine staff cannot be overemphasized. As the New Brunswick representative on the FPT Working Group on Isotopes, I would like to acknowledge the tremendous support we have received from Health Canada, the convening of weekly teleconferences, the regular updates on the supply situation, and their efforts to ensure that suppliers give us forecasts for the immediate future have helped us with planning at the local level. I would also like to acknowledge my colleagues from the other provinces on this group for so freely sharing information on supply and methods to help cope with and to manage the shortage. It has been extremely helpful. So in summary, I'm pleased to say that up to now, we have coped with the situation well, but I remain anxious about how we are going to face the future as the uncertainty about the supply continues. This perpetual state of crisis is not healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. And now we're going to Dr. Bourget via video conference. Dr. Bourget, can you hear me? I know that
I can hear you very well.
I just want to tell the committee members there is a long delay. So when Dr. Bourget will be making a 5-minute presentation, and then following that, we'll go to questions and answers, Dr. Bourget. So please begin now.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking you to appear before your Standing Committee on Health. First of all, as a preamble, I would like to say that I did not want to, as a European, get involved in internal Canadian politics, but rather, through my testimony, perhaps I could share the European situation as it stands with you. First of all, the situation, the crisis in terms of technetium is not a strictly Canadian or specifically Canadian or European problem. It is a world, global problem that concerns Canada more specifically, Holland, Germany, and France, if you exclude South Africa because it has a weak production of molybdenum. These 4 countries are directly concerned because to date, they were those that were producing most molybdenum throughout the world, needed for the generation of technetium. The first point that has already been raised by my colleagues is the issue of technetium. There were some concerns about the place for technetium exams within the strategy. The debate is no longer ongoing, and I would like to say there is an excellent report that was edited by the European Community, dated June 30th, that gives a complete overview of the relevance of these exams. Also, a Dutch study was conducted, and it is available on the European Association's website, and it also reveals an investigation in terms of predicted growth in the technetium exams in Europe. Of course, it does not consider the situation of emerging countries, as might have indicated by our colleague, Professor Urbain. Today, there's a serious supply problem with respect to technetium-99. It's a serious public health concern. What is the situation today in Europe? Well, it's the same as in Canada because we depended not only on the Canadian reactors and also the Dutch reactor, which currently is online but will be offline for significant maintenance as of next spring, which will, of course, lead to a serious supply shortage because both the Canadian and Dutch reactors will be offline, meaning that approximately 30% of the world needs will be covered over that 3 to 4 week period. This is a serious difficulty, of course, and on the European side, we're doing everything we can to bring about an industrial solution. A European industrial solution, unlike the initial MAPLE project, does not intend to cover world needs. I think that is very important to note. It's important to have transatlantic solutions that would ensure secure supply in the technetium-99. Currently in Europe, the crisis is moderate. It was much more severe last year. There were periods when the supply per country was from 20 to 90%, or to 80%. Some European Community members received supply through Russia or former USSR countries, because at the time there were some generators producing these supplies, but are not currently authorized on the European market. Clearly, the situation is different from that in Canada because we have a greater number of suppliers in terms of marketing of generators. And perhaps one of the advantages we have today is most industries revolve around an association, the AIPS, which is a credible stakeholder in the management of this crisis, involving the public authorities as well as the industry and associations like mine that can work together to find some kind of emerging solution. What you referred to earlier on.
Dr. Bourget, your presentation time is up. If you wouldn't mind just concluding, and then we're going to go into questions and answers.
Very well. No problem. Well, I'll answer questions. I think I've said the gist of what I had to say.
Okay, now we'll go to Dr. Alexander McEwen.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity of appearing before the committee again, and honourable members, I'm grateful for this chance to give you an update of where I perceive we are in dealing with this issue. I will remind you that I also appeared before the Standing Committee on Natural Resources on October the 19th, and I will repeat the statement that I made there, that the system is coping. That coping is fragile, and the term that I used was stressed stability, which I think provides a fairly good summary of how we are managing. If I can have your indulgence, Madam Chair, I'd like to give a brief overview of where we've come from and then look a little bit to the future. I think we need to recognize, in particular, two groups of people who we really have impacted by this and who have responded well. The first is our patients. We have been able to offer tests to all those people who need them, but patients have been asked to attend at odd times. They've been asked to change appointments, and I think we need to recognize the stresses that we have placed upon them. Secondly, and most importantly, I think that this crisis has been managed through the very hard work and flexibility of the community, in particular of our technologist colleagues. They have changed shifts, they have changed working practices, and they have changed the hours at which they come in. And I think we owe the Canadian Association of Medical Radiation Technologists a vote of thanks for all they have done. Secondly, I think we also need to recognize that the generator manufacturers have really gone above and beyond the call of duty in sharing, in accessing alternative sources of molybdenum, and of ensuring that there is some cohesion around the way in which generators are supplied. I think we also need to recognize the efforts of Health Canada. They have facilitated regulatory approvals. I think of the Australian Opal reactor molybdenum approval. The guidance document, which we have met and discussed on many occasions, has, I think, proved very helpful in enabling institutions and departments to change practice in a way which has really helped deal with the crisis. And most importantly has been sharing the supply forecasts and sharing the supply actualities with provincial and territorial colleagues and with individual institutions. I also think that we have been fortunate. The supply of molybdenum has been a little better than we had predicted right at the beginning of the shutdown. Lantheus is the Canadian producer. I will remind you that they supply many sites, particularly in Ontario. They have been at about 50% throughout this crisis. Covidian, the other supplier who rely on non-NRU sources of molybdenum, have obviously been able to supply close to 100% of their customers and have been able to share with Lantheus. I've provided you with some charts on supply. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but I'd be happy to answer questions. This chart provides an overview of national supply from the beginning of the crisis. This is a composite of Lantheus and Covidian supply. Because Lantheus are the primary Canadian suppliers, this reflects the real status across the country. Although, for example, if we look at the last week that we have on this chart, we have something between 50 and 60% supply. These figures are very dependent upon the sharing arrangement that the companies have had. The second charts that I have provided to you are from Ontario individual institution supplies. They provide the calibration date. The bold column provides the original generator activity that they got before the NIU shutdown, the amount ordered, the amount delivered, and then the percentage pre-NIU shutdown, and the percentage that was delivered as a percentage of the amount that was delivered as a percentage of that was requested. I think these data are important. It's a snapshot of 1 week of supply to individual institutions, and behind that is the second week. So I will reiterate, I think the situation we currently have is one of stressed stability. There are a number of concerns. The first is reduction in the number of referrals. Last week I made cross-country phone calls to a number of centres looking at their experience in referrals. The message that I got is that there has been no year-on-year change in most of the centres. I think the issues in the small urban centres in Ontario, as Dr. O'Brien has mentioned, are a real concern.
Thank you, Dr. McEwen. I'm sorry your time is just over right now, so we've gone a little overhead. But this does give us time for Q&As.
He's the advisor to the government that
Yes.
it would be much. I think you would find consensus to let him finish.
That would be lovely. Would everyone agree? Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Both Dr. O'Brien and Dr. Urbane identified the issue of cost. This is clearly multifactorial. Cost increases had been announced before the NIU shutdown. We are waiting to hear from our provincial colleagues on what the provincial differences in costs are, and we will report back as and when we get those data. The Canadian Association of Medical Radiation Technologists have identified issues of human resources, and I am grateful to the information that they provided in the report that they issued earlier this fall. I think there is no doubt that the impact is greatest at the technologist level, where we have asked for really significant changes in work practices to help us deal with this, and they have responded magnificently. I think we are all concerned that we see a continuing flow of technologist students coming into the system, and that we see a continuing enthusiasm for this as a discipline. My concern, obviously, now is moving forward into 2010. Our position is one of stressed stability. The international reactor community, as Dr. Bourget has said, is working through APES to develop a plan for increasing supply from other producers other than Petton over the course of the year. There is a meeting in Paris later this month of the producers, and they will be delivering a plan after that which will maximize utilization of reactors. ACL have indicated that they anticipate being up and running in the first quarter of 2010. Clearly, we all hope that this happens, but we have to plan for the situation should that not happen, and that is the focus of my activities at the moment. And this coordination of reactor schedules and reactor activities is clearly going to help this. And finally, we are continuing within the community to improve the way in which we use our resources. This involves the use of different isotopes, for example, thallium imaging for the heart, and for ensuring that we maximize the use of our generators. So there are 3 initiatives that I think are important going forward into the future. CIHI, the Canadian Institute for Health Information, will be looking at a detailed study of the impact on referrals, utilization, volumes, and technologist levels. We anticipate that they will be reporting on this towards the end of the first quarter of 2010. So we will have a snapshot of what is happening at this time. Secondly, I believe that the Canadian Institute for Health Research results of the competition, specifically looking at alternates to current clinically used medical isotopes, is a valuable and important tool for replacing, possibly urgently, some of our technetium products. I am currently discussing with the Minister ways in which we can facilitate, as Dr. Doig said, the very rapid translation of this research into clinical practice. 7 proposals were approved from funding, of which I believe at least 4 have the potential to have a major impact early on the practice of nuclear medicine. And finally, we've heard that the expert review panel will be reporting at the end of this month, and I believe that this is a very important initiative and a very important report for the way in which we will practice our discipline. Madam Chair, I'm grateful for your indulgence in allowing me to talk a little longer, and grateful for the committee's indulgence.
We are called to a vote right now, unexpectedly. The bells are ringing to call the members to a vote. There's a 30-minute bell with a vote around 4:45. So I'm thinking, with your indulgence, perhaps we could continue on for 15 more minutes because we're very close to the House. Is that, can I get unanimous consent to continue on? What time is it now? Until, what time is it now?
Well, it's
Christine?
10 after.
Just a minute.
If you do 5 minutes each, you could get one.
I think we can get one round in if we're very diligent about doing it, 5 minutes each. But you will have to listen when I adjourn you. Dr. Bennett, you want to start? 7 minutes Q&A, please.
5, I think. 5.
I'm sorry,
5
5.
minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and I think it is quite worrying to all of us, and I guess I am concerned that there's quite a discrepancy between the testimony that we've heard, and certainly I had hoped that there would actually be a process by which the government would be tracking things like referrals, because I think that certainly in the testimony of the Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine that the prospect of referrals going down 10 to 25% means that diseases will be found much later. And so I am also concerned that we've had very good evidence that from the Association of Technologists that they are worried that the applications to their courses and are also diminishing, and that there is also a concern that if there is not research capacity at the NRU, that we will lose international researchers and we'll lose Canadian researchers somewhere else that then will never come back. So the lack of leadership on this, and I think that also we've heard internationally that there is no substitution for reactor derived isotopes. We will always need isotopes coming from reactors, and that without a plan B in this country and only 50-year-old reactors, we actually have to have a plan. So I guess, and I have to say that rarely do we see physicians all agreeing. Usually you have more opinions than physicians in a room, and for both the Ontario, the Canadian as well as the CMA to come up with recommendations that are so coherent is important. So I guess my question is for Dr. McEwen. When both the CMA and the CANM and the Ontario are all saying that there needs to be a revisiting of the decision around the Maples by an independent expert panel, when they are all saying that they need some of these other isotopes approved much more quickly, but mainly that this money issue is serious on the ground around what a transfer medical infrastructure, but also to mobilize PET scanning across the country in a way that is done, as well as that there doesn't seem to be the kind of relationship that we hoped would be between the government and these professional organizations. So I guess my question is to Dr. McEwen. In the 4 very clear recommendations of the Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine. Will you be recommending those 4 recommendations and the recommendations of the CMA to the Minister?
Madam Chair, I'm grateful for the question and the comments around it. I think we need to recognize that this is a situation where the system is coping. It is doing no more than coping. I believe that the CIHR competition has addressed some of the requests of the CMA, and in particular, I believe that the opportunities that at least 2 of the grants provide for alternative tests are really significant and will provide us with data to facilitate the way in which they can be brought into clinical practice. I believe that the issue of referrals is one that is clearly, again, I think, reflective of the geography of this country. In those centers that I polled last week, there is no year-on-year change in referral patterns.
Did you call all of them? How did you decide which ones to call?
Those centers were Vancouver, Alberta, Manitoba, the Atlantic provinces. Dr. Lamoureux from Quebec is on record in the press as saying that there has been no significant change in referral patterns in Quebec. And in my conversations with Dr. Tracy, he indicates that he is seeing some recovery of referral patterns in the hospitals that were concerning him in Southern Ontario. My belief, and I have stated this before this committee and before the NRCan committee, is that we are seeing a real difference geographically, and that those centers which are suffering the most through this crisis are those centers that are in the smaller urban and rural areas in Ontario.
Thank you, Dr. McEwen. Ms. Fallow.
Dr. McEwen, j'aurais 2 questions.
Dr. McEwen, I have 2 questions for you. I hope you'll be brief as much as you can so that I may ask you my second question. First of all, based on the fact that Dr. Urban in his presentation said that today the long-term situation is untenable, that most of the professions related to nuclear medicines are being jeopardized over the long term because we are unable to sustain training for these individuals. And Dr. Bourget was saying that in Europe, they're looking at a continental solution that's being developed. They want to have a transatlantic solution. Also, based on the fact that the NRU is old, and even if it were to be put up to speed again in the first trimester of 2010, that would be a short-term solution. We would have to revisit the issue. It's an old reactor. Would you recommend to the government and to the health minister that they establish a long-term plan for the supply of technetium-99 here, produced here, locally?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I will be brief. I believe that I indicated in my submission, my initial presentation, that we are now looking at medium to long-term solutions. I believe that we do provide an environment which is attractive for medical radiation technologist trainees. My concern is that they are being frightened off by a perception, if you will, that the sky is falling. Certainly our own training program continues to have an excess of applicants. My concern is that if we do not provide some continuity and confidence, I agree with Dr. Urbain that we are at risk of losing some outstanding young people to the field.
Second question, can you be even clearer when you say that you are going to be assessing the costs for the provinces in terms of the entire global crisis? Do you clearly have the intention of recommending to the minister that she compensate the provinces for the additional cost engendered by the entire isotope shortage?
I think that's a very important question. I know that it is a matter that was discussed at the last Federal Provincial Territorial Ministers meeting. I know that it is on the agenda for future Federal Provincial Territorial meetings. And as I indicated in my submission, we are waiting for data from the provinces to understand those real cost impacts.
Mais est-ce qu'il va y avoir compensation?
Will there be compensation, though?
I am afraid I do not belong to the government. I cannot answer for those questions. All I can say is I do intend to understand what the cost implications are. Once I understand those, I can have an appropriate conversation.
Docteur,
Dr. Bourget, can you tell us what are the long-term solutions that have been assessed by specialists and governments in Europe? Perhaps you'll be able to give us some positive examples which our government could then follow up on, because it seems as though it is also facing a shortage of solutions. Do you mean in terms of technetium? Yes, absolutely. Well, perhaps to clarify one point, the study that we're doing in Europe, and which also applies, I think, to Canada, is to figure out where the expertise is. It is on reactors, but also on processing. Those processing sites are Canada, Holland, and Belgium, essentially. So there is expertise potential we have to build on. Clearly, in Europe, there is the medium-term project, because we're looking at 2016, which is 5 or 6 years away, on the Dutch project, the Palace project. You know that also, at the same time, there's a southern French project, Jules Horowitz, which is not designed to produce molybdenum, but would allow for a backup, as a backup to the Dutch reactor. The third project is absolutely credible, and it is the use of the university reactor in Munich, Germany, which, along with Jules Horowitz, should back up the Dutch project. Clearly, it is designed to make a production sustainable that would be able to cover European needs. That is absolutely clear. In other words, that would offset the Dutch situation today, but it would not be able to cover the world global needs. The idea would be to have twice the production capacity, so as to deal with those issues of maintenance in one reactor or another. And as I said earlier, we need to imagine or conceive of a transatlantic project with an equivalent on the North American side. We know that it is the greatest, they are the greatest consumers, or you are the greatest consumers of these technologies. Thank you.
Now we'll go to Ms. Washali-Solis.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and thanks to all of you for being here today. First of all, Mr. McEwen, can you give us confirmation that the expert panel report to be tabled on November 30th will be made available to all of us in Parliament and publicly?
Madam Chair, I know that it is being received on November the 30th. I do not understand or know enough about parliamentary procedure to know whether or not I can answer that question. I assume it will be released when it can be.
I think we'll all be looking forward to getting
a look
at it immediately after that. Can you tell us, Mr. McEwen, in which way the federal government assures some coordination at the provincial level on these issues? Because it seems to me that unlike at least with the pandemic and the H1N1 vaccine, there was some accountability through the Public Health Agency of Canada, but I don't sense that there's any accountability from through your office or from the federal government as a whole for avoiding provinces or medical institutions to have to deal directly with suppliers?
There are two routes of communication which happen regularly. There is the federal, provincial, territorial meeting which occurs weekly, where data are shared.
Okay.
We have the meeting of the expert working group, which involves both the Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine and the Canadian Society of Nuclear Medicine.
But do you, as the federal government, take responsibility for ensuring reliable supply
Madam Chair, I'd like to remind you that I am not the federal government. I am an advisor to the minister, and therefore I cannot answer a question like that.
Okay. Could you tell us, would you be able to tell us what are the costs to the provincial governments for the medical isotope shortage?
Those data have been requested from the provincial governments. They have not yet been given to us.
So the fact that the last conference of health ministers there was an indication of at least a minimum cost of $250 million. You can't confirm or deny that?
I can tell you anecdotally that I have discussed with colleagues on the ground in individual institutions. There is quite a range in the increasing costs that have been noted. One centre, for example, has said that they are seeing something between $8 and $12 a dose increase.
And all of the additional costs are borne by either the provincial governments or the healthcare institutions, as opposed to the federal government, correct?
My understanding is that that healthcare delivery is a provincial role. Right. I will remind you that this issue was raised at a recent meeting of the federal, provincial, territorial ministers meeting. The data have been requested. Once the data have been received, we can understand what those real costs are.
I'd like the rest of the panel to comment on Mr. McEwen's use of the term stressed stability, because I haven't found too much by way of stability in the system. And I think it would be useful to hear about the impact on patients, the impact on professionals, the impact on our colleges and our nuclear medicine facilities.
Thank you for that question. I think perhaps the best way to answer your question is simply to underline the language that Dr. McEwen has used, which is exactly that. It is stressed stability at the moment. If you reflect back on the language that I used when I spoke to you about the H1N1 situation, we talked about surge capacity and the lack thereof, and that is the situation with the nuclear isotope crisis. We are at the moment coping. We have very little, if any, room for further coping. So as your international guest alluded, if the overseas reactor goes down at the same time as we still have no capacity in Canada, that is a surge capacity, a negative surge capacity that will undoubtedly adversely affect all of these people to my left who actually deal with this on a daily basis.
Dr. O'Brien?
The way to describe this is as an example of what goes on in my department on a day-to-day basis. We're told that because there's only 20% or 50% or 80% supply on a day-by-day basis, it's like we're horse trading. If I can reduce so much activity to do a certain test, can I move some few millicuries over to another test to try and get this test done for that patient? And this is day in, day out for our technologists. Our patients are still getting the test done. There are days when there is no isotope, and if I have to do a study called the lung scan to look at blood clots in the lung and that patient cannot have a CT scan, that patient may or may not get the full study done on that day, because I will not just have the amount of isotope needed to do it. And then a study that would have taken an hour to do now takes 2 days to do, because I have to wait till the next day to do the second part. And this is very stressful on our clerical staff, on our technologists, and they come to me on a day-to-day basis, say, we need leadership, we need supplies, we need to get this fixed, we cannot continue on as is. And so I think everybody's right here. We are coping. We are coping in an unsustainable, fragile system which is beginning to fray at the edges more and more.
Yes, yes. I'm sorry your time is up, Ms. Foshlees-Elise. Thank you for those good questions. We're going to suspend the committee, and I would ask the committee to resume after votes here in this room. And thank you for your indulgence, and we will be back with more questions. So get yourself a cup of tea, and we have to go into the House. Thank you. Can I ask the witnesses, please, to take their seats? Thank you.
So who's
Dr. Carey is next. Yes. And we are going to begin. We're continuing our 5-minute Q&A round, and we start with Dr. Carey. Or we finish off the round with Dr. Carey.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that I did have the opportunity with my colleague Pat Davidson. We did meet with the Canadian Association of Medical Radiation Technologists, and I think we should all commend them to see the different the amount of hours that they put in and changing their own personal schedules. They really made a big commitment to, even with the difficulties, to get the job done for Canadians. But I wanted to ask Dr. McEwen about the research announced. The Canadian Institute of Health Research recently announced $5.3 million in funding for 7 research projects that look into the alternatives for key priority diagnostic needs. And I think it is a good example of us trying to find alternatives. Now, you did mention earlier on that there was 4 proposals as well that you are aware of that might help in like the medium and long term that you're aware of. Could you expand a little bit and let the committee know about that?
Certainly, Madam Chair, it'd be a pleasure to address that. I think the CIHR initiative is an extremely important initiative in looking at ways of ensuring this crisis does not continue longer than it has to if we continue to have disruptions of technetium supply. Of the 7 projects, I believe that 4 have the potential to have very early impact on clinical practice. If you look at the projects that have been funded, one is a study of rubidium-82 in cardiac imaging. I believe that this will provide the evidence that will enable the regulator to approve this as a new way of imaging the heart. Certainly, the literature data suggests that this is an effective way of managing patients. If that research pans out, then it relieves a lot of stress on the technetium system because cardiology is such a major part of nuclear medicine practice. I believe that there are 2 projects, one related to imaging the kidney and one related to imaging lymph nodes in patients who have breast cancer, which could translate very rapidly into clinical practice and which could again reduce the amount of technetium that was needed. There is one slightly more ambitious project looking at red cell imaging. This is where we take a radioactive label, put it on red cells, and use that to measure 2 things. One, whether bleeding is occurring and where bleeding is occurring from the gut. And the other is to look at cardiac function in patients who are receiving chemotherapy. Both of these are very important tests, which use a lot of technetium. If this test can be again substituted, it provides a lot more flexibility to the system. And then finally, and I believe this is not a short-term solution, but it is a solution that I believe the scientific community must look at, is can new target design and new technology enable technetium to be produced on cyclotrons? Whether or not that is possible, I do not know. I am not a physicist. I do not know. But if the new technology enables us to do that, then it enables us to redefine the business model. So I think that that is not short-term, but it's very exciting long-term research.
Thank you very much. There was a question, or there was a statement Dr. O'Brien stated, and I think it was something along the lines of some doctors were saying, would we even need technetium in the future? Is that what you stated? Is that kind of in line with what Dr. McEwen was saying? We're seeing this research in alternatives. Could you elaborate a little bit on what you were saying there, what you meant?
Well, in the sense that there's always been the debate that will nuclear medicine be around, and do we have to make the investment to ensure that there's a medical isotope supply for the Canadian population, or will the specialty be replaced by something else? Data would tend to show that medical imaging with nuclear medicine techniques, functional imaging is here to stay and will actually become more and more important. Part of the CIHR grants is looking at positron emission tomography rubidium-81, is what Dr. McEwen mentioned. 2 others are associated with positron emission tomography as well. So the importance that nuclear medicine brings to physiological functioning imaging surpasses a lot of other techniques. PET imaging in our specialty is the next evolutionary process in that ability. And so I think it is safe to say that we will continue to need a demand for medical isotopes. In Ontario, we have 100 nuclear medicine departments, something around 200 gamma cameras. PET imaging is not going to replace all of that. So PET will have a role to play, and that's part of the balanced strategic plan that we look at in Ontario, as PET playing a role, routine medical isotopes playing a role. And the important component is to upgrade our gamma camera equipment that's on the ground now so that we use less medical isotopes, reduce the exposure, and that can be done today. The technology exists. So that's what I was getting at. Sorry.
I think Dr. McEwen also wants to make comment on that.
Just thank you, Madam Chair. Very quickly, I'd like to agree with Chris wholeheartedly that I think that this issue around technetium supply has in many ways shown the value of nuclear medicine to our patients now, but more importantly, it is enabling us to redefine how we will practice in the future. And so I think we have to, amidst dealing with the crisis, recognize that this is an opportunity as well to redefine our practice.
Okay, and no, I'm sorry, our time is up, Dr. Carey. Now, we did have committee business at 5:15, but due to the fact we have votes, can I ask the committee if we can take the first 15 minutes of Wednesday's meeting to clean up our committee business? Is everybody in agreement to that, the first 15 minutes? All in agreement? Carried. So what we'll do today is we will continue the Q's and A's while we have these people here. It's very important. So now we'll go into the second round and 5 minutes Q&A, and we'll start with Dr. Duncan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Thank you for your testimony. I think the job of this committee is to ensure that patients' health is protected in the short term, medium term, and long term. I am concerned. There appeared to be a dichotomy of positions here. We heard not optimal, serious public health concern, nuclear isotope crisis, suboptimal imaging, and then stress stability. I think we need to address some of those. I'd like to begin with Dr. Urban. How many times, or did you try to approach, did the Canadian Nuclear Medical Association ask for meetings of the Minister of Health or of Natural Resources?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part of your question.
Did your association ask for meetings with either the Minister of Health or the Minister of Natural Resources?
We basically have been active at the level of Health Canada. In January of this year, we were sent, basically, our association was sent to Paris, and there was a delegation of Canada led by Serge Dupont from the NRCan. I'm not entirely sure that there is a direct line of communication between the CANM nor the NRCan nor the Minister of Health of Canada. My understanding is that we have to go through Health Canada and some various processes too.
Thank you. Did the ministers ask for any meetings with you?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you. This is for Dr. McEwen. I'd like to ask again about this November 30th report. Will it be made public in its entirety, or will only parts be shared? And do you know when there will be, and maybe you can't answer that, sorry, and when will the government be responding to that report?
Madam Chair, I would again like to remind the committee that this is a report that is from NRCan. It is not from Health Canada. I would love to be able to answer that question because I suspect of everybody in this room, I would like to see it the most. So I'm sorry that I can't give you any more information than that.
That's fine. Thank
I
you.
apologize.
Dr. Urban, and I don't know if you're able to answer this, I'd like to have your ideas. How do you feel the government has handled this crisis, and what do you think could be done to help patients at this point?
It's a very complex crisis. I think you heard from Dr. Patrick Bourget that it's affecting the entire world. I think the crux of the question is really the supply of isotope across the world. Canada was producing 40% for the rest of the world. Suddenly, it came down to zero. And as you know, the announcement was made that Canada will get out of the business. So where that leaves the rest of the world and Canada. I wish there would have been a plan in place before making this type of announcement. And I think we have said multiple times that unfortunately Canada was already 20 years behind in terms of isotope available and in terms of the technology. So we keep repeating, and it's very true, and you can verify that with our colleagues out of the border, but also in Europe. We have to practice today medicine. We have to manage patients with 20th century tools in terms of being at the cutting edge like Canada was 20 years ago. So I don't feel that Canada is using really its resources appropriately.
Thank you. And Dr. McEwen, I don't know if anyone here can answer this. Do we actually know, or do we have an idea when the NRU will be coming back online?
My understanding is that they have some confidence that they will meet the Q1 expectation.
And we're in Q1 because I think, as Dr. Urban has said, and it's been said today, there needs to be a contingency plan, and it's hard for doctors and hospitals to plan. Okay, we really need a date so that they can do proper planning.
Again, my understanding is that AECL will let us know as soon as they have some confidence that their repair methodologies are working. I said in my presentation that my immediate action is now to look at the medium term and plan for the worst case scenario. So that is what I am doing with my colleagues at the moment.
Thank you, Dr. McEwen. I will now go to Mr. Trost.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just sort of finish up for my own clarity what Mr. Carey was asking about. Am I understanding this correctly, that the future for nuclear medicine looks bright, but it's likely that we'll be using different or a more diverse pool of isotopes than we currently will be using, so the usage of Technetium-99 may not necessarily be going up. Instead, we may be using a more diverse pool of isotopes. Is that a correct characterization? Am I understanding that correctly? I'm getting one head nodding. I'll take two people to answer this one.
Who would like to answer that? Who would like
Doctor.
to
Yeah, I think you are absolutely correct. The issue is technetium will not disappear anytime soon. Technology exists. 80%, you don't go from 80% of technetium usage to 0% even in 5 years. Where the problem is that over the past 20 years, Canada did not have the foresight, and I'm using Canada in the largest possible meaning. It could be the government, it could be Health Canada, it could be the physicians, it could be whatever. We did not put in place enough alternative to technetium, such as today we're paying a big price. Europe has done differently. They have evolved a positron emission tomography program across all the countries, which basically enabled them to navigate better the crisis.
I think, Dr. Bourget, you wanted to make some comment on this as well, right? Go ahead.
Yes. I'd like to say a few things. I don't fully share the opinion of my colleagues on substitution. In Europe, we are absolutely convinced that technetium has a lifespan of at least a few more decades because at the very least developing countries will need it, and also because the proportion of camera tape that my colleague Dr. Urban is 1 to 10 compared to what exists for this type of camera. The problem with PET is that mainly it is used for oncology. It doesn't it can't be a substitution for these methods of technetium-99. In France, we've been developing 90 machines that are strictly used for cancerology, and they cannot serve as a substitute for the technetium exams. And it would be a basic first step in examining patients. So PET and technetium should not be confused. Technetium, I think, still has several decades ahead of it. And I think that leads us to believe that a project like the one that would be built around new reactors is one issue.
Thank you. I guess then this is leading to conclusions then from committee members, because what the sort of isotopes we're looking for also impacts what will we design to produce the isotopes. So I guess this is my question. Do you gentlemen think it's prudent from your perspective, I realize you're, and Mrs. Doig there, not merely to just, instead of concentrating all our efforts on one particular reactor or one particular production regime, but to diversify our efforts into the broadest scope of projects without, of course, stretching resources too far, so that we have more sources because of the variety of isotopes. Would that be a prudent and well thought out strategy from your perspective? Yes, no, and why?
Okay, Dr. O'Brien.
Very much so. There isn't going to be a grand slam home run solution to this. There's going to be multiple 25-cent solutions to enable us to have a proper management for medical isotope and healthcare accessibility in Canada from the nuclear medicine perspective. It's going to be important from an Ontario's perspective is to put forward a plan that is tried and true and relatively accepted, that this is a good thing to do for medical isotope production, something along the lines of Europe. They're moving forward with a reactor-based program. And I do agree that technetium is going to be around for decades because PET imaging and the other types just cannot replace it in a cost-effective way that we have now. But you also have to have a more balanced approach. We don't want to put ourselves, all of our eggs in one basket. So I believe we need to have a tried and true technique, possibly reactor-based. We also have to support new and innovative approaches to medical isotope supply as well. But don't put those new and innovative sources as our main crux of what we're doing now. So we need that balance. We need to be able to use existing medical isotopes in a more efficient manner as well, because the costs are going to go up, and hence we need modernized equipment on the ground.
Thank you, Dr. O'Brien. Monsieur Mallow.
Dr.
Bourget, in answering my question, you said that a transatlantic solution was the best solution so that we can ensure long-term supply of technetium. And in replying to Mr. Trost's question, he was saying that technetium had a number of decades of a lifespan left, useful to society because alternative solutions are not yet up to date in order to meet the needs and to cover the uses that technetium has today. The only project in the works, although it's been abandoned, was the Maple project that could have been in the works. What a number of groups seem to be asking for and have been asking for since the beginning of this crisis is a reassessment by an international panel of experts, an assessment of the Maple reactor. So I wonder, what is stalling the process? Why is the government not moving ahead? Not to restart the project, but at least to assess through the through an expert independent panel, the usefulness of it. Is there anyone around the table that would like to say, based on the experience, based on information you may have, why the government does not want to answer in a positive way, answer this request from a number of groups that are involved in the area of nuclear medicine?
Peut-être l'aviseur de la...
Perhaps the minister's advisor, perhaps Dr. O'Brien.
Dr. O'Brien, okay.
It's a very important point that you make up. Our perspective is that the decision to abandon the Maple reactors may have been premature without taking into consideration all the collateral damage that has potentially arisen because of this. And there may be regulatory issues from Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission that may have a problem with licensing the reactor, but this has to be looked at in an open public forum. If there is a documentation supporting the abandonment of the Maples, then that should be allowed to come forward. So far, we do not know if there's been any real evaluation of the Maples in a thoughtful, fruitful way that evaluates all the implications both on research, on jobs for Canadians, on distribution, on access to health care for our patients, because medical isotope production is a Canadian industry that we are about to lose. And with that goes multiple jobs and research capabilities and avenues for our postdoctorate trainees or PhD individuals. Where are they going to go if you do not have an infrastructure to support them? So definitely, not only from a health perspective, but from a Canadian perspective, this should be reevaluated.
Okay, Dr. Irvin?
A brief comment. I beg to differ with Dr. McEwen about the relevancy of the CIHR-funded project. And one question that we might want to ask ourselves is, we spent $6 million of a project which clearly will not yield anything within 2 years, where we probably should spend $100,000 to have a panel of experts looking at the Maples.
Okay, Dr. McEwen?
Will agree to disagree with my colleague. I do think that this is a very important initiative looking to the short to medium term, and I believe that we will see benefits from it.
Dr. O'Brien?
One of the things with the CIHR, one of the grants is looking at, for renal imaging, iodohipuran. And that's an agent I used 30 years ago. It's a different agent using iodine-131 versus iodine-131, but we already have the information. The lymph node is a very important research project, lymphoscintigraphy. There are hospitals using that today in Ontario. So this is research that I think is important to gather information. But if I go back to iodine-130, to Hipuran, I was using that in 1978 as a technologist. So there are good things looking at it, but it's almost as if we're reinventing the wheel a bit on certain aspects of this.
And now we'll go to Ms. Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to share my time with Mrs. MacLeod. I just have a couple of quick questions. I think that we certainly owe a huge debt of gratitude to the whole medical community for stepping up and managing this issue. However precariously we may be managing it, we are managing it, and it is because of the medical community that we're doing that. And as Dr. Carey has said, he and I both had the opportunity to meet with the CAMRT and discuss the issue with them last week. So we know the sacrifices and the changes that they have made. Dr. Deutsch, you had made a statement, and I just wanted to ask you about it. In your remarks, you said that reports of sporadic adverse events, and of course that's to be expected in the situation. And you went on to say delays of 48 to 72 hours in suboptimal imaging due to the extensive use of thallium-201 rather than the technetium-99. Do you have a concern that there will be less than optimal results or testing done if there are other mediums used rather than the technetium?
I think that I ought to defer to all of my colleagues to my left to give you the technical answers to that, but the short answer is yes. Whenever we have to find a workaround to something that is current best practice or current standard procedure, we can often find a workaround, but there is always a risk attached to doing that. And that's what I was alluding to in my remarks. Now, I think if you would like the specifics and more detail, with your permission, I would defer that to the gentleman to my left.
Would any of you?
Yeah, I fully agree with Dr. Doit. The picture, the analogy that I can use is this. None of us would like to drive a car from 1960 in 2009. Now, if you have to go from point A to point B and you have nothing else, that's what you use. But all of us would like the 2010 model.
Okay, and I'm referring to new technology and new techniques that may be coming on board. So just so we're clear, so Dr. O'Brien, do you have that same concern?
The concern from the suboptimal imaging that was being talked about with thallium is based on radiation exposure to the patient because it is a higher exposure than what we're looking at. It's also very difficult to schedule, and the patients are subjected to different types of procedures. But the diagnostic yield is not that bad, but it is higher. It comes at a price of higher radiation exposure, and this is what we used in the 1970s again. So this is a 30-year-old technique. But again, with our sensitivity towards radiation exposure to patients, it's not an optimal product to use at this point. It's good to put your finger in the dike to prevent it from collapsing, but it's not what we want to use. With the future innovative stuff, definitely we are seeing some very interesting radiopharmaceuticals coming down the pipeline. But without having the infrastructure to use those on a regular basis in community hospitals, they won't have a big effect.
So, Ms. McLeod, perhaps you'd like to ask your question now, too.
I had hoped to get in two, but I guess we'll see how it goes, and thank you, everyone, for being here. And I guess my first question would be to Dr. Bourgeois, is we've heard about some of the research that we're going to be doing in Canada, and I wonder, could you maybe speak briefly to a bit of an international perspective in terms of where research is going on this issue?
Dr. Bourgeois?
Research in the area of medical radioisotopes, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, well, it is skyrocketing, the research in this area. Unlike what you might tend to believe, the research is not strictly on positron emission isotopes, but also simple photon emitters, including technetium. Part of the research is translational, involving converting molecules so they can be used with a technetium marker. At this point, the arrival of PET on the international market and clinically has led to an explosion of research in this area. What countries are we talking about? Industrialized countries, of course, North America, US, Canada, Europe, Japan, Korea are countries that are really working on radiopharmaceuticals. But in terms of research on radioactivity, strictly speaking, clearly the states I referred to at the beginning of my presentation, the U.S. and Europe are far ahead of the game.
And we'll now go to Ms. Murray.
Thanks for your testimony. I just following from what I just heard, and also earlier question about the decision that Canada took to get out of the business with the Maples reactor. So what's the implication for Canada, if any, if research is skyrocketing? What's the implication for the activities associated with the Maples reactor, not just the pure production of technetium? And what's the implications on the need to have a backup for Chalk River, which we know is an aging facility that's shown us it's going to let us down from time to time. So I'm just wondering about some of the other the implications of discontinuing our role as in this industry.
Dr. McEwen?
I'd be happy to answer that, Madam Chair. I think that Dr. Bourget, in describing the explosion of research in this area, reflects the importance of what the nuclear medicine community can do in terms of assisting our clinical colleagues make important clinical decisions, stratify patients for treatment, and in the future, I think, as Christopher said, we will be moving to the era of personalized medicine. What is particularly important, and why I think the CIHR round is very important, is that it indicates that we're not only looking at how do we deal with technetium products, how do we find alternatives to our current tests, but we're committing to that evolutionary path to the next generation of tests. The CIHR, I had the privilege of being part of a working group that CIHR has put on medical imaging as well. And so within that context, we're building a framework that is going to enable us not only to look at alternative ways of making technetium, but at technetium replacements at the same time as we build the framework to do what Dr. Urbane and Dr. O'Brien have so eloquently pointed out, which is leading to the next generation of
I
tests.
want to make sure I have time to hear from the others about the implications on our research and other agendas of abandoning Maples.
Without having research capabilities, if you abandon Maple, you are losing a Canadian industry. You are losing the opportunity for our postgraduate PhD individuals, our academics, to have a very fruitful career in Canada. And we are also abandoning our patients, because without having the ability to have medical isotope research in Canada, our patients' ability to access new and innovative research protocols will no longer be here, because all of that research may be south of the border. And so it is a collateral damage and impact, and that's the importance of really ensuring that Canada does have a role to play in medical isotope production and in basic nuclear research as well, because these reactors are research and production units. And we're focusing on medical isotopes, but we cannot abandon our research potential. And I'm very concerned about that, very.
2 points. The first one is that medical isotopes are produced by research reactor. So the first goal of those reactors is to do research. I think we should not lose sight of this. If we don't have a reactor to do research, that's this entire entire aspect of research technology which is up here. The second one is that there will not be personalized medicine without medical isotope.
Okay, thank you so much. I guess this has brought our committee to an end today, and we want to especially thank all our presenters for your very insightful commentary. And we wish you well. And committee, thank you. And we will have a subcommittee now on neurological disorders. And so this committee I will adjourn.